What's going on, my good people? Mike Hidalgo here. Thank you for joining us on another FCP Euro DIY. Today, we're going to be working on a 2016 BMW F10 535i. Today on the F10 behind me, we're going to be installing EU6 injectors, as that is what this 2016 model is equipped with. To learn a little bit more about which injector is right for your car, whether it's an EU5 or EU6, please be sure to click the link in the description below, where our very own Gareth Foley takes you through the process of how to identify which injector is right for your car. You certainly don't want to mix them up, otherwise your car will not run again. Like I said, today is the EU6 in front of us. This kit is available on fcpo.com, comes with the injectors and the decoupler elements, which are going to be needed every time you remove and install injectors. If you're just replacing a seal or something like that, maybe you're pulling them out to work on the car, be sure to replace the Teflon seals down at the bottom. Otherwise, you will not be able to reinstall them. You're going to have a leak, and it's going to be a bad time. This DIY is applicable to every BMW equipped with an N55. Again, the process will be the same whether it's an EU5 or EU6, so just be sure you figure that out before you get started. Typically, these are going to last anywhere from 100, 200,000 miles, and so on. They are typically pretty stout, along with the high-pressure fuel pump. However, as preventative maintenance, if you want an interval, consider 100,000 miles a safe mileage. These are known to be stuck open. Like any injector, they are prone to failure, and when they get stuck open, it's usually bad news bears. Before we get started on this DIY, let's take a look at some of the tools we're going to need for this job. For this job, we're going to be using a small torque wrench. We have a 3/8 drive torque wrench, as well as a 3/8 drive ratchet and a 1/4 inch small extension for the 3/8 drive. We have a 14 and 17 millimeter wrench. A flared wrench is best if you can get your hands on one, especially one with a head that can kind of bend and curve like this for some of the tight spots we're going to be working in. As far as sockets go, we have an 11, a 10, and an 8 mil. We have a T25 and a T30. We have both extended and short stubby ones of those. We have, because we're bougie, the CTA flexible screwdrivers. These are a 7 mil and 6 mil bit driver. You can use a flathead screwdriver as well. You will need a short one for one of the charge pipes, to which we also have a regular flathead screwdriver. Small adjustable wrench, which we're going to use with our injector puller tool. This is CTA 7658. We're going to use it primarily to remove the injectors. You can use it as well to install them. However, you're going to need a crow's foot that will fit around these zinc heads here on the tool. That's going to be our first specialty tool. Second specialty tool today is going to be the Autel. This is a MaxiCheck 808. This is going to help us get the calibration numbers programmed to the car when we install our new injectors. Some brake clean is always handy, an electric ratchet to speed things up, and very needed for this job, some safety glasses if you don't have some already, and some shop towels for the fuel that we're going to be messing with. Now we know what we're working with, let's go ahead and get started on this DIY. All right, my good people, you've determined your car takes EU5, EU6, your BMW, whichever one you're working on. The first thing we're going to do before we start wrenching is disconnect the battery. You don't want the battery on with working on the fuel system, especially with a high pressure fuel pump like this vehicle has. Oftentimes, if the key comes near it or you walk away with it, maybe come back, kind of wakes up the car and may prime the system, and you get fuel everywhere. So the safest thing to do is just undo the battery. On the F10, we have a cover back here that we're going to lift up. This cover is held down by two plastic 10 millimeter nuts that we're going to zap off. You can just throw these over in the cubby for now so we don't forget about them and lose them. This will allow us to lift this up. I'm just going to go ahead and pull it out all the way. Set this to the side, and that's going to give us access to our battery, which is hiding right here. We have our negative terminal and our positive terminal. Those are both two 10 millimeter nuts. We're just going to zap them loose a bit. We're not going to remove them all the way, so we'll start with the negative. That should be enough to loosen this up. Pull that off and tuck it to the side. And just as insurance, we'll go ahead and do the positive terminal as well. Basically, what you have here is this giant board, which a lot of lines go to. There's a tab. You can see this metal bracket that goes around. It basically just hugs the battery. There's one on either side that can lift it up. What we're going to do is we're just going to lift it up. Without getting too crazy, we'll get a towel under here. That won't make contact. We'll be good to rock and roll. And so with that, my good people, we're gonna keep our trunk open. A, as a reminder that the battery is undone. You're done working on the car, you go in to start it, nothing happens. And B, so we're gonna have to crawl through the back seats and pull the emergency release handle later because you can't get into the trunk to hook up the battery. So with that, let's hop back up front and get ready to pull some injectors. All right, my good people, we are under the hood of the car. Now our first thing to do over here is going to be to get access to the fuel injectors. So for that, we have a bunch of plastic fantastic to get out of the way. We're going to start by removing our air box so that then we can remove our pipe, which then leads to our charge pipe, the beauty cover, the whole nine. So with that, for those of you that are not familiar, follow along. We're going to start by undoing the clamp up top here that separates the intake pipe from our air box. So we have some play there. So to start, we're going to start by undoing the clamp that holds our air box to our intake pipe. You can use a flathead screwdriver or a 6mm socket or driver. Just be mindful, sometimes the heads of these clamps can change. For example, this one's a 6, the following one's a 7. So just keep that in mind if you're going to be using sockets and drivers. Before we lift this up, on the driver's side, we have a couple grommets to remove these power cables from. So let's go ahead and do that now. So we have a total of 3 grommets, pretty straightforward. You just kind of work them up. Sometimes they can be a little bit tedious. There's like a little teeth coming out of these brackets that hold them on, but they're just there to make sure they don't dangle all over the place. Once you've had these off once before, they get a little bit easier to take off. If you're doing this for the first time, they can be a little bit stubborn. This back one always likes to put up a little bit of a fight for me. Now with those undone, we can go ahead and lift up the air box from the front. As we lift it up, there's a couple rubber grommets that hold it in place. Just kind of pop them up. There we go, there's 1. There's 2. We're gonna separate it from our feed pipe here at the same time. And then we can go ahead and set this to the side. Now is a great time as any, if you haven't already, pull this beauty cover off. They're mediocrely held on by some rubber grommets up front and 2 little tabs that go into our pipe back here. With this out of the way, the next thing is going to be to remove this part of our charge pipe. We have a line going to it here, part of the PCB system. We have another line going to it right here with our heater going to the valve cover, electrical connector, and we have a 6mm hose clamp down at the bottom. Now we're going to take our T25, get these 2 Torx screws out. Depending on the condition of your hardware, you may be able to use a T27, but for us today, the T25 fit best. All right, with that connection loose, we'll work it out a little bit more once we get the 10mm that holds our pipe in place off later. But for now, we have a clamp further down along, 6mm head if you want to use a socket or flex it driver or a shorty screwdriver, whichever one you have lying around. Right now we have the CTA bits. These are awesome, they're flexible. Quite literally will fit almost anywhere. Wonderful. And on top of our valve cover, we have a 10mm bolt that holds our pipe in place. We're gonna go ahead and remove that one next. And now we should be able to work this pipe off of our heater bit over here. Now we have a little bit of flex in it. Just using a little bit of brake clean to act as a lubricant to help get this piece out. And with this pipe out of the way, that's one less thing blocking us from getting to our injectors. So with that, we're gonna set this to the side. We still have a few more things to remove, some insulation and whatnot. So let's get to it. Back here, we have some insulation to remove and some power cables which run over the top of our manifold and valve cover. These kind of cassette into some clips on either the manifold or valve cover themselves. They're a bit tedious to get out. Genuinely, I think it's just easier to remove the T25 hardware that holds it in place. So that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna start on the driver's side. We have 2 T25s that are located right at the top of the manifold. We'll get those out, then we'll get over to the other side. All right, that's gonna free that up. Let's hop over to the passenger side. These T25s on the passenger bank are a little bit tighter to get to. I might have to switch to a shorter bit And get this front one, there's two of them. And get your magnet tool handy, my good people, because we're gonna need it. With those T25s undone, two on either end, this can come up. This insulation can be separated. All right, that's gonna give us a lot more room to work with. This we're gonna kind of have to hang with. We can go ahead and pull these oxygen sensor cables out of this clip if you think it's gonna give you more room. But with that, we're gonna go ahead and get a bungee. We'll work on kind of suspending this out of our way, and then we can work on getting some more stuff out of our way so we can get to our injectors. We have some oxygen sensor wiring and some ignition coils to clear out. For those of you with an eagle eye, you can see we went ahead and just zip tied our harness out of the way. We just zip tied it to the windshield wiper arm. We're not gonna harm the arm or the harness. It's just nice and gently up out of the way to give us some working room. So pretty straightforward stuff. Before we remove the wiring for the oxygen sensors, we're gonna mark one of the plug and connectors with a paint pen. For those of you that don't have a paint pen or a silver Sharpie or something of that nature, you can use a little zip tie. Do a zip tie around the harness on the plug side, do a zip tie around the harness on the connector side or on the wiring harness side of things, and you can match them up when you put them back together later. So we're just gonna mark them with a paint pen, disconnect them, and then go from there. We're just gonna mark some blue up here. We'll mark some blue over here. And when we assemble everything later, we know the blue ends go together and the non-painted ends go together. You'll see they have a little locking tab here, this little gray one. You can just pop the connector out, pull out the gray connector or the gray locking tab here, and then you use it to push down and you separate these two. Pretty straightforward stuff. Just gonna let this hang out down there. We'll pop this one out and show you again. You have a little gray locking tab. Pull that tab back. That's gonna unlock it. Then you can press on that tab, pull the connectors apart, and boom. We'll swing these over there and we forget about it. That bracket that holds the oxygen sensors on is held in by a T30. We're gonna go ahead and just work that out using a T30 on our 1/4 inch ratchet, just to give us some more working room when we go to remove our ignition coils. All right, I'm just gonna set that to the side. Next, this is gonna be pretty standard, especially for you avid DIYers. We're gonna go ahead and remove the ignition coils. For those of you that haven't done this before, pretty straightforward. These caps come down and lock the actual plug into the body of the ignition coil. Sometimes these can be a little bit stubborn to get up. You can use a small flathead screwdriver and just kind of twist it in here to pop that open. As you lift this up, it's gonna eject the connector out. Something that can happen sometimes is that the little tabs on either end spread open and the cap comes off. So a good rule of thumb is simply to pinch both ends of the top where the hinges are and lift up, and it'll release the electrical connector. If it's having a hard time doing that, you can take a small flathead, work the connector out, and then you're disconnected. And then from there, same thing, you can use these to pull the ignition coils up, these little tabs, but be mindful of the hinges, they're pretty weak. So you can just pinch them on either end, pull up, and out comes your ignition coil. So just to give you a better view without my hands blocking everything, the tabs are just held in by these little plastic hinges on either side, or these little dowels. So these can kind of spread open sometimes, causing this to come off. So when you're pinching, or when we talk about pinching the top here, is simply pinching like this, keeping these tabs from spreading open and coming off of the little dowels. So you're gonna pinch to lift up and pull the connector off. Then I recommend you also pinch to pull the ignition coil body out of the cylinder head. So with that, we're just gonna go ahead and do the exact same thing for the other 5, and then we'll pick it up in a moment. Next on our laundry list of things to do is we have 3 8mm nuts to remove. These hold down the ground for the ignition coil wiring harness. to the cylinder head. So let's grab our 8mm socket, get those out of the way, and then we're going to cover how to disconnect the electrical connector from your injector. All right, we're going to remove the 3 8mm nuts. Each one is between a pair of injectors. This holds down the ground strap for the ignition coil wiring, if you will. We pull those 8mm nuts out and just lift up the wire here. And we're going to go ahead and repeat that on the next 2 sets. All right, here's our last 8mm nut. Now we can go ahead and pull this last ground strap off. With our last ground strap undone, the next thing is going to be to remove the electrical connectors, which are here and here, basically on the left of each fuel line. I'm going to show you how to disconnect those. They're going to be very similar to the one off of our heater valve here. So let me grab an injector and we'll show you how to do that. So this is just to show you an example. This is a new injector and this is a plug that goes to our PCV valve. However, the style plug is pretty much the same as what is on the injectors. These sit in here like this. So when you go to remove these, your initial thought is to pry out the sides of the injector connector here, or the body. But in reality, what you want to lift up on is this middle tab here. And with that, just be super gentle. You want to use a small pick or flathead screwdriver. Gently pry it up and then just pull on the connector and it will come right out. We're going to show you that just now, but just wanted to highlight that a little bit closer on camera. It's a little bit hard to see down there. So middle tab, not the ones on the sides. The middle one's doing the only locking. Little lift and pull out. So with that, let's go ahead and get this first one out of here. And then from there, we will just do the other 5 and get to it. All right, so I have my small flathead. I'm just going to go ahead and pry gently between the injector, connector, and the plug. I'm going to pull up on the 2 wires here, just kind of wiggling that flathead, and out comes the connector. So pretty straightforward, pretty easy. They're not really that tight in there. It's pretty hard to mix these up, so you don't have to worry too much about labeling them. If you do want to wrap a little piece of tape around them and write a number on them, you're more than welcome to. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. But for today's exercise, if you will, we're going to be just fine. We're going to go ahead and continue on the rest of the way, get the other 5 undone. All right, now that we have the connectors all out of our way, we're one step closer to getting this fuel rail out. So that's what we're going to work on next, my good people. This car has a fixed fuel rail, if you will. So the pressure lines going to the injectors are one piece with the fuel rail. They don't have a nut on the fuel rail side of things that you can undo, like you might see on some of the other models. N20s are going to be the same way. Your N26 is going to have a separate fuel rail, pressure hose, if you will, pressure line. This car's all one piece. So before we go ahead and undo them at the injectors, we're going to go ahead and undo it at the fuel rail. So grab some shop towel, grab a rag, get some safety glasses, and let's get to it. We have a shop towel set up underneath our fuel rail connector here, coming from the high pressure fuel pump. Make sure you have your safety goggles on. There's going to be some pressure in this line. So basically we're going to get our 17 on here. I'm using a flared wrench, so I truly don't even have to guess about having a good bite on this fitting. You can use a regular 17mm wrench as well, but with the flared on there, it's not going to go anywhere. We're going to cover this up to protect ourselves and stop fuel from getting everywhere. I'm just going to slowly crack this free. You can hear the fuel release. Give that a second. All right, my good people, so at this point we have our fuel rail undone from our high pressure fuel pump line. Before we go ahead and disconnect the line from the injectors, the pressure lines, we're going to go ahead and unbolt the 4 10mm bolts that hold this fuel rail to the top of our cylinder head. So we're going to hop over just from the driver's side, undo those. That way the rail is a bit free. So as we undo the pressure lines from the injectors, the threads aren't fighting each other and the lines can just naturally come up, basically. So with that, we're going to grab our 10mm socket and undo our fuel rail. All right, before we get to the 10mm, it's easier if you just lift up these clips, one on either side here, and kind of get this harness that runs through here out of your way. That'll give us a lot more room to work with. You can even just throw them on top if you'd like. That gives us view to the 10mm holding this rail down. We have a total of 4. These plastic clips can also either be slid off to the side or broken, depending on how you want to go about this. Here we go. Just pop those out. They have a little notch that kind of keys into the side of the fuel rail that keeps this in place. Pretty easy to remember that the 2 clips are on the 2 middle 10s. So we're just going to go ahead and pop both of them out. We'll throw them up on the cowl so we lose them for later. And now we have a really nice view of the 4 10mm bolts. Electric ratchet, we'll just zap them out. With those 4 11s undone, now our fuel rail will be loose. So when we undo the lines from the injectors, everything will be able to lift up nice and easy. So with that, let's hop over and undo some injectors. We have our 14mm wrench that we're going to use to undo the pressure lines to the injectors. 14mm flared wrench to reduce the risk of stripping the heads on these. You can use a regular 14 if you like, but this has a flex head, which makes my life a little bit easier. Now with that, I still have some towel here. We're going to go ahead and just kind of set that beneath just to catch any fuel that may want to drip down. At the end of the world, it's going to evaporate, but it doesn't hurt to work clean, my good people. Once you break that free, go ahead and undo it the rest of the way by your hand. You'll see some fuel dribbling out. Give it a minute. And with that, we're just going to go ahead and repeat the same process throughout the other 5. So just bear with us while we get those undone. And then we'll touch base in just a hot moment. We're going to undo this Valvetronic connector here, tab on either side, just to keep us from interfering with the fuel rail while we lift it up out of the way. Very easy, just a small tab on either side. This is also a great opportunity to inspect your sensor, make sure there's no oil wicking up through it. This car has fairly low mileage, so I'm not too worried about that just yet, but as the cars get older, that sensor can fail and start intaking oil. With that undone, now we can go ahead and lift up our fuel rail. Make sure that all the nuts are off. Like I said, all of the nuts. We have some rubber grommets in the middle here, kind of holding everything down. So I'll have some towel here at the end of our rail in line. And with that, my good people, that is going to give us all the room we need to work with, which is exactly what we want. So with that situated, the next step here before we get our injector removal tool in place is we have 6 10mm bolts to remove. 3 up top with the stud. So remember, that's going to be the stud for your ground. So those are going to want to go back up top when we're done. And at the bottom, we have 3 regular 10mm bolts. So we're just going to go ahead and zap those out and remove these hold down brackets so that we can install our injector removal tool. We'll show you exactly how that works. These are going to be the 10mm with the ground stud. 3 of those. And then we have 3 just regular 10mm bolts. These are going to sit at the bottom. We just have a 10 on the electric ratchet. We're going to zap these out. Right, here comes the top one. Then from there we can remove this hold down plate. Just lifts up out of the way. And then at this point comes in the CTA removal tool. Unfortunately, you can't just pull these injectors out. What happens over time is the Teflon seals at the tips expand, and that's what kind of traps them in the cylinder head. So you definitely don't really want to take pliers to this and risk breaking the injector in the cylinder head. So we're going to grab our tool. We're going to show you with the new injector exactly how the tool works. And then we're just going to get in here and pull them out. So before I do that, I'm just going to zap these other 2 plates out of place, and then we'll show you that. So we have our CTA tool here. This is what's going to help us remove the injectors. You can already see the shape of the tool is pretty much shaped to the hold down bracket that holds the injectors in place. So this one's a little funky looking, but it's pretty straightforward how it works. We're going to use a new injector just as an example to show you how that is. Obviously the end of the injector is threaded. That's where the fuel rail attaches to. The inside of the silver portion of the tool is also threaded. So when this thing is sitting on top of the injector, the silver top is going to thread on normal righty-tighty, lefty-loosey fashion to the top of the injector, just until it's snug. You can even back it up a hair if you want so it's not jammed up. Then we're going to take the zinc coated portion and also twist that. In this case, it's going to be righty-loosey, so it's reverse thread. And that, the act of that is what's pulling the injector up without spinning the center portion. So pretty straightforward. Obviously, it's only used to remove, but just to do it again, give you a better view. The silver portion is fully tightened down. That goes on the threaded part of the injector to the right. And then also to the right is going to be the zinc portion, and that's going to pull the injector up through this plate. So pretty neat, pretty trick tool. Definitely needed for this DIY. So with that, let's go ahead and set this up, show you what that looks like on the first two injectors, and then we'll go from there. We're going to feed our CTA tool down, making sure that the two bolts line up on the head. From there, before we tighten down these 10 mils, we're going to go ahead and tighten down the tool on top of the actual injectors. Again, we're just spinning the top here, the silver portion, if you will. With our tool on, now we can go ahead and bottom out the two 10mm studs. Make sure you get a couple threads started on them before you zap them down or hit them with a ratchet. Ours are nice and in, so we're going to go ahead and just snug them down with the electric ratchet. And now we're going to take our adjustable wrench and once more turn to the right on the zinc portion of this tool. It's going to make some not nice noises. That's totally okay. That's just the body of the injector coming up, the Teflon seal breaking its seal down at the cylinder head. Once you can do it by hand, the injector should be pretty much freed up. Before we undo these two 10mm bolts, we're going to do the same thing on the other side. All right, with that situated, now we can undo the two 10mm bolts once more. And now we can pull up the whole tool with the old fuel injectors. And here we go, my good people. Pretty straightforward, not too bad. Definitely recommend this tool. At this point, you can just spin off the whole thing. We're turning everything left right now to undo both the injectors and reset our tool for the next one. Here's the tip of our old injector. Just to compare, we'll grab a new one. This is what a 52,000 mile injector looks like. So again, low mileage, really just showing you good people how to do this service today. A little bit of carbon buildup. You know, again, this car ran perfectly fine, but you can see what kind of condition 52,000 miles does to an injector. With the old injector here and our new one, you can see here's the decoupling element. There is a small cut on one side of that ring that you can see kind of the internal bits of it. So when we install our new decoupling rings, we want to make sure that the open part is facing up towards the injector. So let me grab one now and I'll show you what that's going to look like. So here's a better view of that decoupler. You can see one side of it is open. That's going to face up towards the body of the new injector. So that simply slides over like so. Make sure you get it kind of even. And they just pop on. Pretty straightforward. Now we're going to go ahead and remove the rest of the injectors before we install our new ones. We have some numbers that we need to pull off the bodies, so stay tuned. All right, my good people, at this point, the last two injectors are popped out. Now, because of the space that we have to work with, we kept this harness in place. We didn't go behind the firewall to undo any of the lines. We're simply going to undo the tool from the fuel injector. It's not going to insert it or reinstall it or anything like that. We're simply just undoing it so that we can pop this tool out on its own first and then the injector. So just keep that in mind for those of you following along at home. It's a little bit tight, so just separate the two and then pull the injector out on its own afterwards. So right now we're just spinning the silver portion to undo the tool from the injector body. Here's our very last one. Now with that, let's get ready to install our new ones. All right, my good people, the time has come. All the old injectors are out. We're ready to install the new ones. All our decoupling elements are on. Don't forget those. Before you install the new injector, you must note the calibration number on the injector itself. As an example, this one, the calibration number is 215. That's what we're going to be inputting in the auto when we go to finalize this DIY. There's a good chance that A, the number is the same as what came out of your car. There's another good chance that the batch that you're installing doesn't all match. Some might be 215, some might be 261. So you want to know what cylinder is getting what. So for example, cylinder 1 is getting a 215. This batch happens to have 6 215s, so all 6 cylinders will get 6 215s. If cylinder 3 and 4 have a 261 in them, then we're going to tell the auto, hey, cylinder 3 and 4 have a 261 in them. So you get the idea. Make sure you write down these calibration numbers. If you get lucky, they're all going to be the same. Makes your life a little bit easier. So with that said, we're now going to take the injector. Again, decoupling element on. We can take this protection cap off the end. I'm going to leave that on for a hot second. We're going to feed it in the same way that they came out, meaning the electrical connector needs to point in the same direction that it used to be in before you removed it. So for us, they were always clocked in this orientation, all the way straight to the back. So that's exactly what we're going to do. I was going to go ahead, position our injector in place how we want it, make sure that electrical connector is keyed properly, press it down. You're going to feel it kind of sink in a bit. And then with that, we can go ahead and pull our cap off. And we're just going to go ahead and repeat the same step for the other 5. The hold down plate is going to make sure these are secured down properly. So don't worry too much if you feel like you're not getting them in all the way. So one thing we want to talk about, my good people, you just saw us put in one of the injectors by hand. The counter to that, if you're going to be using the install tool, you're going to want to use a crow's foot to put around the zinc portion of this tool. You can use this to install the injectors as well. Same way you took them out. This is going to work in the reverse way. One thing to note though is when you're using this tool, the torque spec for the torque wrench you're going to use in conjunction with the crow's foot is only 2 Newton meters. It's not a lot of force pushing down this injector into the cylinder head. So if you have the proper crow's foot, go ahead and do that way. You can snug all this stuff down and do it that way. For us today, the 2 Newton meters, we don't have the proper crow's foot for this. We're just going to go ahead and use the good old thumbs like you saw us install the injector in the head just a moment ago. But with that in mind, we're going to talk about these hold down brackets. Now you can see there is a curvature to the ends of them. The dipped portions are going to be facing down. These are what hold the injectors in place. And you can also see that they have a square cutout, meaning that when you install your new injectors, you want to be sure that the connectors are not only facing the correct way, but that the top of the injectors are also clocked correctly enough to allow the plate to go around them and hold them down. So you're not going to install an injector and maybe leave it like that. That's not going to allow the plate to sit down. So just keep that in mind. Just a couple of things to remember when installing these. Again, 2 Newton meters for those of you using the removal tool to install them with a proper crow's foot. Make sure you hold the crow's foot at a 90 degree. You don't want to add to the extension of the torque wrench and mess up your torque value. But for us today, we're just going to continue feeding these down by hand, and then we'll pick it back up when we install the hold down plates. Now we're just going to feed the lockdown plates on top, making sure that the curved ends are facing down and they're sitting properly over the fuel injectors. Now we're going to take our 6 10mm bolts. Remember, the ones with the stud up top, on top of them are going to go up top, and then the regular 10mm bolt down at the bottom. Just make sure we get these started by hand first. And we're going to go ahead and repeat the same thing for the other 2 banks. All right, now we're just going to snug them up gently by hand. We're not going to torque down the 10mm hardware just yet. So we're just going to give them a little snug. And that is just to allow the injector body itself to have a little bit of play when we install the pressure lines. That way, if we need to adjust them a little bit by hand, we can, so that the threads go on nicely. We're not trying to jam them up and lock them up too much just yet. So really, I'm really just going finger tight here more than anything, for what that's worth. Now with that, we're going to go ahead and swing our fuel rail down. We're gonna move this towel for the time being. I think we're okay with dripping fuel here, or with what we've dripped. Kind of position that where it needs to go, being mindful of the spots down below. This is gonna have kind of a snug fit over the valve cover. If you have the rubber grommets still on the line, make sure those are there. If not, make sure to guide them back onto the ones on top of the valve cover. We're just gonna gently seat the balls of the end of the lines on top of the injectors, like so. So we just wanna make sure that these balls are seating up nicely on top of the injectors. That's gonna allow us to bring our locking nuts down and get those started. They should start really easily by hand. And if not, go back and just move everything around a little bit. And while I have you here, we're gonna go to the end of the high pressure fuel pump line to the fuel rail as well. Same thing, that has a ball seat that goes into the line. We're gonna make sure those line up properly and just get that one hand started over here. All right, with all of those just snugged up super gently, now we're gonna go ahead and tighten down the 10mm studs. Those get torqued down to 13 Newton meters. For this last one, because it's a bit tight back here, I'm just gonna seat the bracket down a bit with the electric ratchet. There we go. Now we can finalize it properly with the torque wrench. Now at this point, all our injectors are held down properly. We can take our 14 and 17 and snug up the pressure lines. The torque spec for these nuts down here is gonna be 23 Newton meters, roughly. To be totally honest, if you have a crow's foot, that's gonna be the best way to go about this. Otherwise, the old calibrated wrist is gonna work just fine. The goal here is not to crank on these so much where they're super tight, otherwise you're gonna deform the line and cause a leak. Truly, they're pretty snug on. If you remember when we removed them, it was simply just cracking the initial tightness of the nut, and then the rest came off by hand. So that's exactly what we're gonna do here. We'll start then at the pressure line to the injector. Grab our 14, just snug them up, and then we'll move up to the 17. Okay, grab our 14. Again, we're using a flared wrench with a swivel head. Works excellent for this application. Snug, and that's it. It's not gonna go anywhere. Snug. All right, now we can move on to the 17 and do the same. Beautiful. With that situated, let's install the 4 11mm bolts. All right, my good people, we're on the other side. We're gonna drop in the 4 11mm bolts. We're just gonna snug these up gently with the electric ratchet. However, no more than 10 to 15 Newton meters for those of you wanting to torque them down. So let's go ahead and do that now. I'm just gonna get these started by hand first. Always start your hardware by hand first. Don't just go wild and zap stuff in. That's how you strip and cross thread stuff. All right, at this point we can install the 2 black clips and run our harness in before we hop back on over to install the ignition coils and all that good stuff. Now we're gonna go ahead and reconnect the injectors back to their harness here. So we're gonna go ahead and pop all of these in, followed by the ignition coils and then the grounds. So let's get to it. Just gonna line those up. Sometimes it helps having a flathead screwdriver to just pop them in, and that's it. I like to get the ignition coil kind of started with the plug-in before I have it seated all the way in. Just gives me a little bit more room to work with. Then we can slowly lock those in and use everything to just kind of push it down into place. And we're just gonna go ahead and do the same for the other 5. Then we have our ground strap, which goes right over the stud. We're gonna go ahead and set that on. Then we have our 8mm nut. That one's gonna go on like so. And we're just gonna snug it down with an 8mm socket. Beautiful, no more than 8 Newton meters for those of you wanting to torque. We're gonna do the same for the rest, the other two down below. We'll plug in the Valvetronic once more. And now we can install our bracket for the oxygen sensors. Now we're gonna take our bracket once more, sit that like so. I'm gonna reach over 1 second, get this T30 started. With that bracket situated, now is a great time to reconnect your oxygen sensors if you disconnected them. With this goodness situated, we're gonna get our insulation over once more, cut that zip tie, and get this rear electronic harness bracket situated over the valve cover and the intake manifold. All right, my good people, we're gonna install the insulation once more. Don't forget that your pressure sensor connector goes through this insulation as well. Kind of peeks up through here. And it goes on the back of the charge pipe. There's a dowel over here by where the O2 sensor cables go through that pokes through this insulation right here. That kind of helps keep it aligned and in place. It's a little bit of a funky fit, but you know, it's there to keep everything from kind of moving around. So you're really just gonna have to get this back in place. There's not too much to show. It's pretty straightforward. It just kind of pops through. And this all keys in back with itself like so. And now our goal is going to be to get this in position so that we can install the 4 T25s that hold these down. So I think to make our life a little bit easier, I'm going to start with the easy side on the driver's side over the intake manifold, get those two snug down, and then we can move over to this harder side. I want to do the manifold side so I can use those two bolts to kind of help align everything. So we have our 2 T25s over the intake manifold side of things. We'll start with one, get that one just going here. Now let's head over to the other side and get them situated over the valve cover. The valve cover side of things gets the coarse thread T30s, and the intake manifold side of things gets the fine thread T30. So make sure you don't mix those up. I mixed those up at the beginning by accident, but I went back and swapped them around. Now we have both of those installed. This harness right here does route above the fuel line over here on this intake manifold side of the insulation. So if you can, go ahead and tuck that in now, just so we don't forget about it. At this point, we're gonna grab our charge pipe, get that fitted back in, and just kind of work in the reverse until we can get our air box back on, and then head inside to program some injectors. We're gonna install the charge pipe once more, get that fed down over here, get that on the bottom portion of our intake tube, making sure everything lines up with the valve cover here. Spray a little bit of brake clean to act as a lubricant on that O-ring, just to help seat it in properly, just like we did when we took it out. There we go. As long as our 10mm bolt lines up, then we know we're in a good spot. So with that, we'll start with that first, since that's the last thing we removed. Just gonna line that up, get that started by hand. And then we're just gonna go ahead and snug it up gently with the electric ratchet. All right. We can pop this PCV line back in. Make sure if you detached it from the clip behind the oil filter housing cap, that you just pop that back in. Get that in place. You wanna hear that nice clip? Beautiful. This was held in by 2 T25s. Go ahead and get those started again. Just remember, these are metal screws going into plastic threads. You don't need to gorilla them on. Just once they're snug, they are snug. Now we're gonna go ahead and install our clamp down below using a 6mm driver. You can use a 6mm on a 1/4" ratchet or a stubby flathead screwdriver. Beautiful. We're gonna go ahead and just plug in the sensor once more. This is what we flipped around earlier just to show you, but it's straightforward. It just plugs right back in. And then we're gonna feed this into this pipe here. You can see by my finger, there's a small notch. That helps line this up with the charge pipe. It was actually a little bit off before, so this might have been off at some other time for service. But we're gonna make sure it goes back on the same way, while we also work on not pinching the harness cable. Now take your flathead or 6mm driver. Make sure you get the line pushed in on the grommet if you haven't already. I'm just gonna pull back this harness a little bit. Tuck that back in. Like I said, with the boot in place, now you can grab your flathead screwdriver or your 7mm driver or 7mm socket and get this clamp snugged up. And with this situated, now we can grab our air box and reinstall that. I'll put our air box back in. Keying this over here, making sure. That's on the grommets. Push this all the way in. Beautiful. We're going to tighten that hose clamp down there. 6mm or a small flathead screwdriver is going to do the trick. Beautiful. Now we'll just situate these grommets back on that hold these big power cables in place. These go on the side of our air box here. And now with that, we're gonna go ahead and reinstall our beauty cover once more. We're gonna do this before we head over to the rear and install or rehook up our battery. Line those up, get these grommets situated. That looks good. Now with that, my good people, meet me at the trunk and we'll reattach our battery. We're gonna go ahead and reattach our positive terminal. If you did that, if you just did the negative, then you can go ahead and move on, my good people. I'm gonna snug down our 10mm pinch bolt. That's good, just nice and lightly snug. You don't need to go crazy. Now we can reattach our negative terminal. Then we can snug up the negative. And then we can throw our carpet in back once more. All right, we're gonna grab our 2 plastic 10mm nuts. We have a stud on each end. We'll start over on the right, get that set into place, and we'll snug it down. That's good, it's just plastic. We don't need to go too hard. All right. So now with the trunk situated, the battery's back in, everything is back together. The last most important step is gonna be to hop inside of the vehicle with the Autel, enter the calibration numbers so that the car knows what's going on, and we can wrap up this DIY. So I'll catch you inside. Come on, let's go. All right, we're inside the F10. We have our Autel plugged into the car. We have the ignition on. Obviously, we have not started the car. I'm gonna give the Autel a moment here to just wake up. It's time to work. You can either do the diagnostic button or the service button. Today, we're gonna go with service. We're gonna click on that. From there, we're gonna go to Injector, right in the middle of the screen. Click on Injector. We're gonna find BMW. Man, this thing is extra slow. We're gonna do automatic selection. We're gonna hit read. This is pretty standard stuff whenever you use the MaxiCheck 808. Just a way to get connected to the car so it knows what it's reading or what it's working with. Once we have our VIN up for us, it'll confirm what we're working on or what we're driving. We can hit yes. From there, we're gonna go to hot functions. Injection, quantity, compensation. Those were the numbers that we pulled off the side of our injector earlier. We're gonna hit continue. If you remember, our new injectors all match the same. So we're gonna enter the value for the injection valve. That's gonna be F2. We're gonna hit F2. Our new ones are 215, which happens to be the exact same as the old ones. So in this case, we got pretty lucky. Let's say we just had to change it though. You would click the pen, select there, and then you would obviously enter whatever value the batch that you installed with came with. In our case, they happen to just be 215s again. So we're gonna hit OK. All of them are 215s. We're gonna hit save. And now our car is happy. From there, we can go ahead and hit exit. And that, my good people, is pretty much gonna conclude this DIY for today. Overall, a straightforward and doable job on the N55 engine. Again, this is gonna be the same for all your chassis with the N55. Some of the working room may be a little bit different if you're working on a 3 Series or a 5 Series or an X5 or X3, you name it. At this point, all I ask you to do is please click that like button if you like this video. Don't forget to comment. If you have any questions on what we did today, leave those in the comment section below. And if you like this DIY and you want to see more like them, please consider subscribing. We make new ones all the time. As always, thank you for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.